Well, I always liked the combination of the man and the machine. I think that's the real special quality that motor racing in general, and particularly Formula One, has. That, people say, oh, it's all about the car, isn't it? Well, actually it's not, but the car is, certainly 50%, probably a bit more. Even if it's 75 or 80%, the other 20%, which is represented by the driver, is absolutely crucial. That can make the difference. But the cars themselves, you either believe this or you don't, the cars themselves are beautiful things. They're a little less beautiful when they're painted like cigarette packets or whatever they paint them as now, perhaps. But there's a beauty to the sense of form following function, that the form of the cars expresses in some way the speed that they're going to go at when they start moving. And the details of the engineering, even if you're not technically literate, are very beautiful. They're beautiful bits of sculpture, if you like. And that combination of those beautiful inanimate machines and the hero figures of the drivers, the sense of courage and romance and that sort of thing, is what attracted me, I think, when I was quite a small boy.
I think Formula One in the 80s was one of the most glorious times in Formula One. The cars were almost simple compared to what they are now. A steering wheel only turned the car. A gear lever shifted the gears. It was a time when drivers still made the difference, and all the engineering expertise and all the electronics still left a great deal for the driver to do.
You had Alain Proust, known as the Professor, a very smooth, very calculating driver. You had Nelson Piquet, who was Brazilian, very emotional, very clever, cunning driver. You had Nigel Mansell, who was the sort of British lion, who was very exciting to watch, very spectacular driver. And then you had Senna, the virtuoso. And to see these drivers competing with each other at more or less the same stage of their careers, overlapping slightly in a way, but really at their peak together, was phenomenal. Now, lots of drivers do that, join a small team, disappear without trace. They perform to the level of the team. But there are a sort of rare breed of drivers, of whom Senna was absolutely one, who can go into a small team and perform so far above the perceived level of the car that everybody turns around and thinks, how did he do that? What he had done was make everybody in the paddock aware of what he could do, who he was, and what his potential was, that he could take this car, which had nothing, and deliver a result like that in the worst possible conditions for a racing driver. It's impossible to overestimate how frightening it is to race in the rain, how difficult it is. Racing drivers can't see anything in the rain, especially if they're up behind another car. With the big tyres they have now throw up so much spray that it's like driving in thick fog. Like trying to drive on a motorway in thick fog, with 20 yards visibility at racing speeds. And to be able to do that, that really sorts out the great racing drivers from the pretty good ones.
And you have Alain Proust, a world champion, out there leading the Monaco Grand Prix, surviving all those wet corners, going by many wrecks, driving his heart out for a victory at Monaco. And here comes first-year Formula One driver from someplace in Brazil, Ayrton Senna. Now, this was one of the wettest races I've ever been at, and it needed to be stopped. But what Senna could not get was that it was in a French area, considered a French event, with the FIA being housed in Paris and run by Frenchmen. To him, there had to be some reason beside the rain that was no problem to him, to where they took this victory away from him. He knew that in another 3 or 4 laps, he would catch Proust, he would find a way around him, and he would be in the number 1 position.
I remember in Detroit, a couple of weeks later, it was already a buzz between the media, the managers, sponsors looking after him. You know, I remember Philip Morris making a deal, a personal contract with him after that. Well, we knew that he would not stay at Toleman for the 3 year, the supposed length of his contract, because the Toleman team was not really improving, and the potential of the team was just not big enough for such a talent.
Aquela chuva tão forte, ele não tinha adversário. Ele venceria aquela corrida. Se fosse disputado 100 vezes, ele venceria aquela corrida. E foi uma corrida muito importante para o Brasil por várias razões. Inclusive, naquele dia, naquele domingo, tinha morrido aqui no Brasil o presidente eleito, né, que é o Tancredo Neves. E aquele momento político para o Brasil era muito importante. Era o primeiro presidente eleito depois de terminada a fase de ditadura. E ele esteve doente durante um bom tempo e morreu. Quer dizer, correria o risco de o Brasil, sei lá, de sofrer um novo golpe, coisa desse tipo, tudo que ninguém queria. E a vitória do Senna, até nesse sentido, foi muito importante para o público brasileiro, para o povo brasileiro, para nós ali. E eu tenho certeza que ele mesmo sentiu isso também depois, à noite, quando a gente estava jantando. Ele veio naquela noite, nós fomos jantar, e na mesma noite ele saiu do restaurante para pegar o avião para vir para o Brasil.
He was very complete, you know, from the tire to the engine to every single component of the car. He wanted to know everything. He was pushing every mechanic, every engineer to the very limit to understand, first of all, and to improve the overall package. And he took a lot of his energy, but he was concentrating as much on that aspect of the job than driving itself. And he was the first one maybe to stay at the circuit till 9, 10 o'clock with the engineer and the mechanics. Didn't want to go back to the hotel or to play golf like Alain Proust or a few others.
But it pretty soon became apparent that Lotus wasn't going to be big enough for him, that Lotus was actually a team just beginning its decline. I think when he was there, really, there's nothing he could do to stop it. The driver doesn't design the car. And so, he did what he'd done before and what great drivers do, and which was to move again to an even more competitive team. Such an important instinct for a driver, that, to know where to be, to know not who is competitive this season, but who's going to be competitive next season.
Na época, as equipes mais fortes eram Williams e McLaren. A McLaren era eu diria que a McLaren sempre foi um reflexo dos valores que o Ayrton praticava. Nesse ponto, o Ayrton e o Ron Dennis têm muito a ver. Os dois são perfeccionistas, os dois, vamos colocar no presente, têm aquela ideia de que nada pode dar errado se for bem planejado e bem executado. E, enfim, lutavam pelo mesmo ideal. O Ron também tem um background de batalhador, de alguém que lutou muito para chegar onde chegou e vencer na vida. Isso aproximava os dois muito. E, na época, a trilogia melhor equipe, melhor piloto, melhor carro era liderada pelo Ron Dennis. E era a McLaren.
The first time I really met him and tried to talk to him was in '84 when we had in Germany we had a Mercedes appearance, and we had a small race in Nürburgring with a new Mercedes 190, I think, And we had all the, not all, but some Formula One drivers, plus old Formula One drivers. I remember Dennis Hulme, I remember a few other drivers, and we had this competition, and some people from Mercedes, they asked me if I could wait Ayrton at the airport. We were having 10 or 15 minutes time difference, and I had a car, so I was waiting for him to bring him at Birmingham. That is the first time that we talked together, and we had a long drive, something like 2 or 3 hours. So we had time to talk. Did not talk very much, but he looked impressed. He looked impressed also. I was driving very fast on the motorway in Germany. He said to me, "Oh, you're driving fast," and you know, it was nice, and we were quite close. And because he did not know anybody, so he was always close to me during this at least the first day, and and then it's very funny because he looked very open, looked very nice, and we were starting the practice. So then we were fighting together for the pole position, and I saw him very competitive. So I made the pole. He was second, and then at the start, he went before the flag. And I said to myself, "Shit!" Then I have to take care of this guy. That was '94. I did not know that we could have been teammate or whatever, But
Teammate, companheiro de equipe em Fórmula 1, significa: esse é o meu primeiro adversário. Esse é o cara de quem eu tenho que ganhar, porque é o único cara que tem o carro igualzinho ao meu. Eu posso ter a desculpa de eu corro na McLaren, a Ferrari está melhor. Eu corro na Ferrari, a McLaren está melhor. Mas eu não posso ter a desculpa de dizer a minha Ferrari é diferente da Ferrari do companheiro. Então, esse é o primeiro. No início de carreira, principalmente, o piloto entra numa equipe e o adversário dele é o companheiro. Se ele andar melhor que o companheiro e bem melhor, ele tem alguma chance no futuro. Se ele não conseguir isso, a carreira dele acaba ali.
Prost had already won 2 world championships there. He'd been there for several seasons. He was extremely well established in the team. He thought of himself, and he thought he'd got the team to think of him as the number one driver, the team leader, the guy to whom most of their efforts were devoted. But then Senna joined, and Senna was not going to accept a number 2 status, that's for sure. He hadn't joined the team to be the supporting cast.
Antes do Senna chegar na McLaren, o Alain Prost era considerado o destruidor de companheiros de equipe. Eu me lembro do Joe Ramirez me dizer: "Reginaldo, eu estou muito preocupado com o que vai acontecer com o Ayrton na McLaren. Eu sei do talento do Ayrton, mas o Alain Prost ele é guerreiro, ele cria um clima de guerra. Isso vai ser, e assim ele destrói adversários, como ele destruiu o Keke Rosberg. Destruiu, digamos assim, em termos técnicos, né? Ele destruiu na pista, superou, mentalmente ele superou o adversário. E eu falei para o Joe Ramirez: "Joe, com o Senna vai ser diferente, porque o talento é muito maior do que outros com quem o Prost dividiu uma equipe." E foi realmente o que aconteceu. O Alain Prost se assustou com tudo aquilo que o Prost tinha e tem de talento, de compreender uma corrida, de inteligência, de frieza. Ele se assustou quando ele começou a correr com Ayrton. Ele não pensou que alguém pudesse ser tão bom piloto como era o Ayrton.
He had a target. That is obvious that when he arrived in Formula One, he had a target, and it was myself. When I arrived in Formula One, I was happy to be there. We had different top drivers. I never had any target, anybody, any driver that I want to be team or I want to. I had a huge respect for the old drivers. For Ayrton, it was different. He really wanted to beat me. He really wanted to be world champion, and beating me, and that was really a strength, and that was a plus in his approach, because when you are a racing driver, you want to have a motivation.
What do you say about a man who says he's seen God in any circumstances, never mind on the last lap of a Grand Prix when he's a few yards away from winning the World Championship. Most people would be sceptical, and I think most people would be right. Senna did seem to be absolutely convinced that he'd seen God. He didn't say what God was, how God appeared to him in that moment. But it's his right to say that. He must have known that he would risk not looking a fool, but attracting skepticism. And who are we to challenge that, really, when anybody makes such a claim? But certainly unique in the history of Grand Prix racing.
And when you're talking about God, and first of all, I believe in God too, but I would never use the same words that Ayrton did. When you're on the same team doing the same business and taking risk with the driver, with your teammate, and these kind of things does not make you very comfortable, because it's not only believing, in God, or it's like using that as a strength, and having always the right. That means you are thinking that he was always right, and in this case, it could be dangerous on the track, and that I always felt, sometimes not very comfortable.
There were many cynics in Formula One who challenged whether this was really, was an authentic and real account of what he felt and what his values were. But I was there to witness it very often in a more private environment, and he was most definitely sincere. This is how he felt. He felt that he was, that he was supported by the God that he believed in, and why on earth would I, or should anybody, dissuade him from that belief? Because he was special, he was committed, and strong beliefs, I think, are a good thing as long as they're positive ones.
É curioso que em inglês o teammate é traduzido em português para companheiros de equipe. E eu por várias vezes usei o termo inimigos de equipe. Porque se você tem dois pilotos, como foi o caso do Ayrton e do Proust, como companheiros de equipe, é inevitável que acontecesse uma disputa interna.
As a journalist and as someone who was in a TV production meeting every weekend talking about what's the story, we loved the rivalry. We loved it on the track, in the garage, and in the motorhome afterwards.
Ron was really behind Ayrton, but I understood that very quickly. It's a business. For him, it's a business. And I always understood, when I was with Nicky, he was really half and half, I would say, at the beginning, and then suddenly he went obviously behind me, because I was the new generation, and Ayrton was, when I was with him, the new generation.
Throughout their periods at McLaren, they always had equality. We would go at some points to quite extreme lengths. I mean, engine choice, for example, once we're determined which two engines were going to be used for the race, then it would be literally a sort of number out of a hat routine. We'd put the two engine numbers, in some sort of container, and then the drivers would alternate. This was probably this was trying to eliminate the view that Honda was selecting which engines went to whom. But it was, you know, there was a degree of paranoia because it didn't need much. Either a slightly better engine or slightly better setup, that would determine who won the race and who became world champion.
When it was Prost versus Senna in the same team, you know, the romantics would certainly go with Senna, and the pragmatists would go with Prost. And Senna could be a bit cruel about it, but there was some truth that Prost, you know, was one of those who made excuses quite a lot, which you never like to hear from racing drivers. You know, you'd rather they just fessed up, you know, car wasn't good enough, or I wasn't quick enough on the day, you know, or that's the way things go sometimes. But Prost would tend to go into the minutiae, why the car wasn't good enough, or things had worked against him, or, you know, and it was that can, even though, you know, every element of the explanation, you know, might have truth in it, somehow it's unattractive. You don't want to hear it, actually. Well, remember Jean-Marie Balestre was the man in charge when Senna was denied the chance to win the Monaco Grand Prix in a Toleman when he was, you know, a novice in Formula One. And Balestre was a very divisive figure, very confrontational, argumentative, autocratic, very autocratic. And Balestre was in charge still in charge in the late 80s and right through to the beginning of the 90s, when Prost and Senna had their famous collisions at Suzuka. And Balestre was the man who attempted to sanction and suspend or whatever Senna, who felt that he was being discriminated against, probably with some justification.
Mr. Balestre had the room beside me also on the other side. And I enter into the room and Balestre is there, and he came into my room and we had a talk, you know. And don't forget that I had a very intense collaboration with President Balestre for the safety. But Ayrton was convinced that it was a conspiration, and the story start like this. And I'm very sorry about that. Yeah. And for me, the race was very simple. It was very, very clear that I was quicker. And believe me or not, but I was playing with him during this race. I was really fast. I knew that he normally could not overtake. But I set to run and Ayrton 2-3 races before Suzuka, because every time Ayrton tried, especially at the start, to overtake me, I opened the door, because I did not want to have a crash. I always said to them, from now, I mean, no way I will open the door anymore. We are fighting as a, you know, don't take care about the team spirit. I fight for myself. It's difficult to make people, when you are a pro Senna, that you say, okay, it's done not on purpose. To be honest, I don't care so much, because I promise you I did not do it on purpose. But I did not open the door, which is very, very different, especially to this corner. But if you are not a racing driver in this corner, knowing the track and knowing the chicane, you cannot judge. So it's a waste of time to try to explain this situation. It is my opinion. It's a race incident, especially when you are fighting for the championship, knowing that if I wanted to open the door, I could not make the chicane myself.
It was a little bit less than not yielding. There was a level of aggression, and that caused cars to collide, which was, let's say, motor racing. But really it was then what unfolded which was just so wrong.
I went back to the pits and I saw Ayrton pushed by the marshals and start again. And obviously I was not that happy. And that's it. I went into the garage. I had very strong argument with Ron, and that's it, you know. And yeah, no, I did not remember.
To the tower first or to the garage first?
Garage, or no?
I believe you went to the tower first.
Maybe to the tower. Yeah.
Maybe you had the argument with Ron in the tower.
In the tower, yeah, because one was already in the tower, and we had a strong argument there. But in no situation, I was, for example, in the tower with Mr. Balestre alone, for example. That did not happen. I read that many times. We had the argument. I even did not enter into the race control. That is the first time that a team has done an appeal and a request against his own driver, you know. So I was in this kind of mood where, honestly, I wanted to be world champion, but everything was possible. And looking at your own team, you know, going so far, yeah, I did not know what could happen.
Proust was very, very political. I think it's probably fair to say that he was with several teams during his career, and I don't think his relationship with any of them ended happily.
They took the championship away from him, and they suspended his license for a period. To me, it was the worst use of power, political power, in my 15 years on the Formula One circuit. And Ayrton would never forget it. Alain Proust, somewhere, I know, deep down inside, was ashamed of it. And the rule was actually changed later to allow what Ayrton did to become legal because of it. I circled around the back of the tower and was standing right in an illegal place at the pit entrance. And as soon as Ayrton crossed the line into the pits, I came over the wall, and in my ear, all the way back in Bristol, Connecticut, they were saying, ask him about the incident, ask him about the crash, ask him about who did what to whom.
A rivalidade entre o Ayrton e o Prost foi a maior rivalidade que eu vi no esporte em toda a minha carreira. E olha que, fora os 38 anos de Fórmula 1, eu fiz futebol, eu fiz Copas do Mundo, Olimpíadas, eu trabalhei em vários outros setores. Nunca vi rivalidade igual a do Ayrton e do Prost. Porque era uma rivalidade que envolvia tudo, tudo. Havia crítica, principalmente do Prost, até em relação à forma do Ayrton ser como pessoa.
But he really was a pure product of kart racing. And he brought to Formula One a way of racing that, until that time, had been particular to karts, which was a very no-compromise kind of approach to racing head-to-head against your rivals. Physical contact between the machines was okay. It was fine in karts. It was, safe enough. But to bring that into cars was something quite different. And I think that was one of the things that shocked his slightly older rivals. They weren't used to that. The kind of etiquette that they'd grown up with was different, was rooted in a belief that you didn't make contact with another rival's car, because if you did that, you were likely to die.
Attending a Brazilian Grand Prix, there's nothing like it. And when Ayrton Senna is on top, it is just an out-of-body experience to be involved, to be in the paddock, to be on the grid. People ask me, what was your greatest experience in 15 years on the Formula One circuit? And they're amazed that I say the first time that the race went back to Sao Paulo, to Interlagos, Senna is on pole position. It's the start of the race, and there's 300,000 Brazilian fans at that circuit singing "Ole, ole, ole, Senna, Senna. When the engines started, you could not hear the engines right next to you for the sound of the fans singing his praise, singing with love for his accomplishments and for love of the person. He wanted to win the Brazilian Grand Prix. He wanted to win his own Grand Prix, and here it is 7 years into his career, and he has not won the most meaningful race. My favorite part of a Grand Prix was the starting grid. And I used to do the pit walk and walk down the center of the grid and give an update on every team that was on the grid. Now, I don't know if it was because I was getting closer to the front of the grid or closer to the start of the race, but I swear to you, as a fact, when I stood next to Ayrton Senna's car, at certain times the hair would stand up on my arms. There was an energy, there was a force, there was a spirit in that cockpit that you could not find around any other car on that grid. It was absolutely electrifying.
Eu acompanhei o Senna e andei junto com ele nas ruas de vários países do mundo, especialmente dentro de para chegar num autódromo, por exemplo, no Japão, que você caminha 1 quilômetro e pouco para chegar do hotel ao circuito, passando por um parque de diversões, e eu vi e pensava assim comigo, como é que uma pessoa pode ser adorada dessa forma, né? Uma adoração sem limite.
I realized that when I drove the car in September in Estoril, and the first few laps I've done, it was wet, and the car was absolutely unbelievable. I've never drove a car like this in my whole career, but yeah, it was an active car at the time. Was a good second minimum, a good second quicker. I have a 3-year contract, and then I have a moment where in July I have a phone call from Frank, and saying, "Oh, I need to talk to you. I have a big pressure from Renault, and I need to talk to you about something." I said, "Okay, Frank. I think I know what you want to talk about, but I am on holidays. I had 4 or 5 days holidays in my house. Okay, if the Renault people they want to talk to me, they come to see me." You know? And in fact, he comes himself with his plan, come see me and trying to explain to me that Renault, they are thinking of having Ayrton in the team with me the year after. And so I said, okay, that is not fair. We have a contract. Even thinking about that is not fair in the middle of the season. So let's put it this way: let's wait a little bit, a few races, and we see what happens. And in fact, I'm going to tell you something that nobody knows, or very few people know, but it's good to talk about that in this. I didn't want to be a teammate with Ayrton again. I did not want to continue with this perception of the people saying, okay, you know, Ayrton is a poor guy with the small car, and Alain is, when he wins, it's normal because he has the best car. You know? I said, okay, you want Ayrton I understand very well, but you pay me the contract for the next year, and I stop. I did not want to stop. I really did not want to stop, but I had to see a situation going again, especially in your own country, going in this direction again. I took my decision myself very quickly, but I wanted to tell them just one month, 2 months later, because I wanted to be a world champion. I did not want to lose the opportunity. When I saw that I was going to be world champion, I said, okay, you pay the contract, I stop. I had enough. Okay, that's what I have done. I did not want to stop. I stopped Formula One only because of that. Otherwise, I wanted to continue.
O Ayrton lutou tanto para ganhar aquela corrida em Mônaco, não conseguiu. Lutou tanto para ganhar a corrida em Suzuka, não conseguiu. E quando ele lutou para estar na Williams, foi o final da carreira dele. Quer dizer, às vezes não adianta você... A gente sempre fala que você tem que lutar pelos seus ideais, lutar pelo que você quer na vida. Só que às vezes você lutar pode não trazer o resultado que você espera.
But from this moment, where I am on the podium, close to him, on the same level, he has changed completely. He was really another person. It was, you have before this podium and after this podium. It is absolutely unbelievable. It was a different person, different driver, in my opinion, different personality. He just behaved completely different. At the press conference, was lucky that we had all the TV waiting for us, but he was talking and speaking and asking questions to me all the time, and talking as he has never talked before, you know.
Was certainly right to go to McLaren after Lotus. That was absolutely the right choice. And to pit himself against Alain Proust was a very brave and a very shrewd thing to do. Shrewd because he knew, or he believed, that he was better than Proust. And by measuring himself against the man who was accepted as the yardstick of Formula One at the time, he could, prove for good and all his own quality. So he could see that there was another team that had a better car than McLaren, that had the best car by a mile in the early 90s. In 92, they walked the World Championship with Nigel Mansell. In 93, they walked it with Prost. So he wanted to be in the car for 94. And that was where his instinct let him down. Probably, given the known factors, given the parameters, it was the right decision. And you would go back and look at the conditions and come to exactly the right decision. Exactly that decision. It happened to be the wrong one. But there was no way he could have known that until he actually stepped into the Williams car for the first time in 94.
If he carried any emotion going into that race that was different from previous races, it would probably be the frustration of knowing that his principal rival was driving a car with an illegal system on it, and that would always incense his sense of fair play. And if I would put anything that was abnormal in his behaviour just down to that knowledge and belief.
I must say that what he said, because I cannot judge myself, but he was convinced that the Benetton was cheating. He was very upset and he was in big trouble because of that. And again, not very happy with the car, with the performance of the car. So he was obviously not very happy, saying that he could not find a motivation. Many times he told me, I cannot be motivated against Michael, against other drivers, and he was really like if he had not lost his passion. He had promised the car, promised the team the safety, maybe some small personal problems possible, but he has lost his skill, and that was very surprising.
It was very apparent to me and to several other people around Ayrton. Joseph, his trainer, and probably one of his closest friends, Sid Watkins. All three of us, for different reasons, very quickly formed the opinion that Ayrton quickly regretted leaving the team. not specifically because of competitiveness or uncompetitiveness, but more because he didn't expect to find himself in such a different culture, and one which was quite alien to the way he was.
He was getting into a car that was like a kind of, an unbroken colt, if you like. It had a lot of problems, a lot of vices that needed to be worked on and ironed out, and some of them seemed to be pretty fundamental. One thing that a driver hates above all else is a car that changes its behaviour in the middle of a corner. There are two things, oversteer and understeer. Oversteer is what we used to call the four-wheel drift, when you steer a car with the throttle and you turn the steering wheel to balance it in such a way as you appear to be going in the opposite direction from the way you want to go, but actually the car drifts around, slides around the corner. Understeer is when you have to put more steering on than you expect to get round a corner. And the worst thing is most cars have the characteristic of one or the other, but really bad cars have both, and they change from one to the other in the blink of an eye, in the middle of a corner, when you're least wanting that to happen. And that's very, very disturbing for a driver because it destroys his faith in the integrity of the car. And that's absolutely crucial to particularly Formula One, to developing, for the driver to develop that complete trust in the car's temperament and behaviour. And it was very clear at the beginning of the 94 season that the Williams absolutely didn't have that, and it had this really unpleasant characteristic of changing its balance. And that takes a lot of sorting out. We saw by the end of the season that Williams had sorted it out, that Damon Hill was winning races, challenging for the title. And for the next season and the two seasons after that, in 96, 97, Williams won the title again, because they'd gone through that bad period. But Senna's arrival coincided with it. And I think that was very disturbing to him, because he'd gone there expecting something else. He'd gone there expecting to be able to walk into a championship-winning car, instead of which he found himself with a serious job of helping the engineers purge the car of its vices and make it competitive again.
Then I arrive in Imola, and the first thing I see when the screen where he has recorded the Alain, we miss you, Alain. To my friend Alain, we miss you, or I miss you. So I'm very happy. Honestly, it's maybe the best thing he has done to me, because this message is very important, because not only because that happened unfortunately the day before he's dead, but when you try to put yourself in a driver's head and driver's position. When you do that, why Ayrton would think about myself at this time of the day? I always thought about that. It is unbelievable to me. And this message is very strong. It's very strong. And it has been something really, really important to me.
A última vez que eu vi o Ayrton foi no domingo. Ele estava muito agitado. Tinha alguns amigos que foram falar com ele. E ele agitado entre o motorhome da Williams e o box. Ia para lá, para cá, ia para lá, para cá. E eu sempre faço, antes de ir para a minha posição na cabine, eu sempre faço uma pergunta para os pilotos, para os brasileiros todos, e para aqueles que sou mais amigo, perguntava sobre a estratégia de corrida. Alguns dizem, outros não, mas sempre revelam alguma coisa que é importante para mim, a informação para ser dada durante a corrida. E eu estava lá esperando para fazer essa pergunta a ele e não pude fazer. Eu vi que não era o momento certo de fazer essa pergunta. O Ayrton confessou para poucas pessoas, eu fiquei sabendo antes da corrida, que ele tinha uma bandeira austríaca no bolso do macacão. E se ele viesse a ganhar a corrida, ou se viesse para o pódio, talvez fosse suficiente, ele ia mostrar essa bandeira austríaca em homenagem ao Roland Ratzenberger.
Seeing the helicopter going to the hospital, I was still hoping. I didn't realize during the live commentary. I didn't realize. Okay, he was going to be hurt. He was going to be maybe in bad shape, but didn't realize he was dead. Didn't want to realize, probably. It was unreal.
Ayrton's accident was caused by problems with his own car, and certainly were in no way connected to the competitiveness of any of the cars around him. Again, there are people who would claim that his, let's say, pursuit of Michael in the Benetton was overly aggressive because of his necessity to compensate for the inadequacies of his car. But again, I think that's a nonsense. It's just people trying to rewrite the script. Simple fact is, Ayrton almost certainly suffered a car failure, which caused the accident, and it was one of those things. These things happen.
For sure, it's a mechanical problem. I'm very careful about what I say because they made the steering column different. Could be a possibility. I have really no idea precisely, but for sure it's a mechanical failure.
The gift that he has had to be used. He had an obligation. To whatever force or powers gave him that gift. He had an obligation to pursue his career, pursue his passion. And of course that those thoughts they were very much with me when he lost his life, because even in the even in the moments of realization, because at the time no one really knew, but even in the moments of realization that he'd lost his life, I found myself strangely uncomfortable with the fact that he wouldn't have done anything different. It's what he wanted to do. And if that was the outcome that was linked to his career, I don't think he'd have changed it even if he had the knowledge.
We find out that it was serious just at the end of the race, or even you always have some different messages. I remember that we had some people coming in to the commentary came in and said, oh, he had a broken arm, and that's it. And maybe 5 minutes later we had a very bad news. So I even said, I remember, okay, there's no point to say unless we know exactly what he has, and then we did not know during the commentary. Then we had big rumors as always. And during the trip going to Forlì to the airport, then we understood that it was really bad.
Did you go to see Frank after the race?
No, yes. Sorry, yeah. I I went to see Frank in the garage just after the race, after the commentary. That is the first thing I've done. Frank and Patrick, they were together, but they did not know at the time. That was just after the race. They did not know exactly what. They were really shocked, but again, they did not want to make any speculation and waiting for that. We only knew from the track to the airport more and more that it was quite serious.
You reflect on the difficult things in your life and extreme emotions, and inevitably, things don't get better in that regard with the process of thought. The pain only increases, and for me, my emotions then were a small fraction of the emotions that I had, when I went to Brazil for his funeral.
All those people in Brazil, for all his fans around the world, he will always be young. Ayrton Senna will always be fast. He'll never be old. He will always be the champion of Brazil and of the world. The grief, even today, may be the greatest statement I can make about what he did. When I meet a Brazilian, soon after that, I have to say, I knew Ayrton Senna, and I interviewed him over 100 times. I was on a cruise in the Nile River, and there were 33 Brazilians on this cruise with my wife and I. And I told one of them that I had interviewed Ayrton Senna 100 times. Sometime during the next week, every one of those Brazilians had to come to me. They had to talk to someone who had talked to Ayrton Senna. They even had to touch someone who had shaken hands with Ayrton Senna. It was like I had known and talked to and touched and shaken hands with God. And they had to do the same through me. These were people who were 8 and 10 years old when Ayrton won his championships. And as children, they were taught that this was one of the greatest men that lived with a Brazilian passport. When you dedicate 15 years to a sport, you're wondering, did you spend those years wisely? And I think I did. And I know Ayrton Senna and I know that Ayrton Senna thought he had. Can you imagine? I mean, I would have loved to see Ayrton with children and grandchildren out on that beach. But can you imagine hearing a news report? Ayrton Senna dies of cancer after a long battle at the age of 50. I don't know. It's in some poetic, unjust way. It was almost fitting that he died in a race car.
I was lucky to arrive at the airport half an hour before his plane arrived. And I saw the coffin put onto a fire engine and taken on the road into the city from the airport on a 6 or 8 lane highway where all the traffic was going in one direction, following the fire engine. Vehicles of every kind you can possibly imagine. And it was just extraordinary. And we all followed, many of them with flags and banners and portraits of him taped to the sides of cars and lorries and every kind of vehicle you can imagine on this high speed run into the city, past houses and windows filled with people, apartment blocks, flags, banners, over bridges crowded with people, all come out to salute him. And then people queuing when the body was lying in state, people queuing for 7 or 8 hours. Children, old people, every kind of person, with a predominance of young people, because Brazil's a young country demographically. And young people seem to have a special relationship with him, but old people as well, all kinds of people, queuing for hours and hours and hours just to go past the body and leaving little keepsakes by the coffin. An amazing sight. And then another motorcade up to the cemetery for the funeral. Again with people hanging off every wall and tree and every conceivable surface. And sky filled with helicopters, news helicopters, all kinds of things. And then the jets from the Brazilian Air Force, their equivalent of the Red Arrows, drawing a kind of Senna S in the sky with smoke. Amazing. I went to the funeral of Bob Marley, which was very, very similar, like an entire nation coming out to acknowledge someone who represented them to the world.